January 3rd, 1943. 24,000 feet above Nazi-occupied France, a 21-year-old American gunner is trapped inside a tiny glass bubble underneath a B-17 bomber when German fighters rip his plane completely in half. As he starts falling 4 miles to certain death, this kid does something absolutely insane. Instead of praying, instead of panicking, he keeps firing his machine guns at the enemy planes trying to kill him all the way down. And somehow, he survives. What happens in the next few minutes is going to completely blow your mind. Because this isn't fiction. This is one of the most impossible survival stories in World War II history. And most people have never even heard about it. Listen, before we dive into this absolutely crazy story, I need you to hit that subscribe button right now. I'm Wasim Rind, and on this channel we bring you the most unbelievable true stories from history that sound too insane to be real, but actually happened. Real people, real events, real survival against impossible odds. So smash that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and buckle up, because this story is going to keep you on the edge of your seat from start to finish. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss a single second of what happens next. So let me set the scene for you. It's early 1943, the middle of World War II, and the United States is running these massive daylight bombing raids over Nazi-occupied Europe. Now, you've probably seen World War II movies, you've probably heard stories, but most people don't really understand just how brutal these bombing missions actually were. We're talking about suicide runs, where American crews had something like a 1 in 4 chance of making it through their required 25 missions. Most guys died before they even got to their 10th mission. The life expectancy of bomber crews was measured in weeks, not months or years. The Americans are flying these B-17 Flying Fortress bombers, these massive 4-engine aircraft loaded with bombs, and they're flying them in broad daylight straight into the heart of German-controlled territory. No stealth, no hiding, just flying in formation at 20,000 plus feet while German fighters swarm around them and anti-aircraft guns blast away from the ground. The idea was that these bombers could defend themselves with their heavy machine guns, and that flying in tight formation would create overlapping fields of fire that would protect the group. In theory, it sounded good. In practice, it was a bloodbath. Now, our guy Alan McGee, he's got one of the worst jobs on the entire bomber. He's a ball turret gunner. Let me explain what that means, because when I tell you what this position actually involves, you're going to understand just how terrifying this job was even before bullets start flying. The ball turret is this tiny spherical glass and metal bubble that hangs underneath the belly of the B-17. It's barely big enough to fit a grown man. You have to curl up inside it in basically a fetal position with your knees pulled up to your chest. You've got 2 50 caliber machine guns pointing down, and you're surrounded by clear plexiglass so you can see everything below you. Here's the thing that makes this position an absolute nightmare. You're completely exposed. There's nowhere to hide. You're hanging underneath the plane in this glass bubble, and when German fighters attack from below, which they often did because that's where bombers are most vulnerable, you're the first thing they see and the first thing they shoot at. You're sitting in what's essentially a glass coffin with machine guns. And here's the worst part. If the plane gets hit and needs to make an emergency landing, there's a very real chance you can't get out of the turret in time. The mechanism to retract the turret into the fuselage doesn't always work, and if the belly of the plane hits the ground while you're still in there, you get crushed. Ball turret gunners knew all this, and they climbed into that death trap anyway because somebody had to do it. Alan McGee is 21 years old. He's from Plainfield, New Jersey, just a regular American kid who joined up after Pearl Harbor like millions of other young men. He went through training, learned how to operate the ball turret, learned how to track fast-moving targets and fire the guns effectively, and now he's part of a B-17 crew stationed in England with the 8th Air Force. His bomber is nicknamed Snap, Crackle, Pop, which sounds cheerful and innocent until you realize they're flying this thing into combat where German pilots are actively trying to blow them out of the sky. On this particular morning, January 3rd, Alan and his crew are part of a large formation heading to bomb the German submarine pens at Saint-Nazaire on the French coast. These submarine bases are critical targets because German U-boats are sinking Allied ships in the Atlantic and choking off supply lines to Britain. The Americans know the Germans know they're coming. The Germans have radar, they have spotters, and they've got some of the best fighter pilots in the world ready and waiting to defend these submarine bases. The bomber formation crosses into enemy airspace, and almost immediately the German fighters hit them. We're talking Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s. Sleek, fast, heavily armed fighter planes flown by experienced Luftwaffe pilots who have been doing this for years. These guys aren't amateurs. They know exactly how to kill a B-17. They've studied the weak points, they know the blind spots, and they attack with precision and aggression that's honestly terrifying. Alan is crammed into his ball turret, rotating the mechanism to track targets, squeezing the triggers on his 50 caliber machine guns, trying to hit fighters that are zipping past at 300 miles per hour. The noise is absolutely insane. You've got the roar of the bomber's 4 massive engines shaking the entire airframe. You've got the constant staccato hammering of machine guns from your plane and all the other bombers in the formation. You've got the crump and blast of German flak shells exploding all around you, sending shrapnel tearing through the air. You've got the zipping sound of German cannon fire ripping past your head, and you're trying to stay focused enough to actually hit something while your hands are freezing because it's 50 degrees below zero at this altitude. Then it happens. A German fighter pilot makes a perfect attack run. He comes in at just the right angle, lines up his shot, and opens fire with his 20mm cannons. The shells slam into the B-17, and one of them hits the bomb bay where the aircraft is still carrying its full payload of 500-pound high-explosive bombs. The result is catastrophic. The explosion doesn't just damage the plane, it literally tears the bomber apart. The entire middle section of the aircraft just disintegrates. The fuselage is ripped in half. The tail section separates completely and goes spinning off into space. The wings are shredded. Parts of the plane are flying off in every direction. This isn't a damaged aircraft trying to limp home. This is a bomber being blown to pieces in mid-air. The men who were in the main fuselage at the moment of the explosion, they don't even have time to know what happened. The pilots in the cockpit, the bombardier in the nose, the navigator, the radio operator, the waist gunners, they're just gone in a fraction of a second. One moment they're alive and doing their jobs, the next moment they cease to exist. The violence of it is almost incomprehensible. Alan is in his ball turret underneath the plane when this happens, and suddenly his entire world goes absolutely insane. The turret isn't attached to a flying aircraft anymore. It's attached to a chunk of twisted burning wreckage that's tumbling through the sky. There's no more aircraft above him. The fuselage that the turret was supposed to retract into is just gone. He's in a spinning metal and glass ball that's plummeting toward the earth from almost 5 miles up. The G-forces from the spinning are probably making him black out repeatedly. His oxygen system is damaged or disconnected, and at 24,000 feet, you pass out from lack of oxygen in less than 30 seconds. Now, most people in this situation would just shut down mentally. The human brain can only process so much before it just gives up. But Alan McGee does something that still amazes military historians to this day. As his turret is falling through the sky, as he's tumbling towards certain death, he keeps fighting. He's still tracking German fighters. He's still firing his 50 caliber machine guns at them. Think about the mindset that requires. He knows he's dead. There's no parachute accessible from inside the ball turret. There's no way out. He's falling 4.5 miles, and he's going to hit the ground at terminal velocity, and that's the end. And his reaction is to keep shooting at the enemy. There's something almost defiant about it. Like, okay, I'm going down, but I'm taking shots at you guys all the way. Maybe he's working on pure training and instinct. Maybe it's the only thing his brain can process in that moment of absolute terror and chaos. Maybe it's courage, beyond anything most of us can comprehend. Whatever it is, he keeps those guns firing as he falls. The ball turret is plummeting toward the ground. At this altitude, objects fall at about 120 miles per hour once they reach terminal velocity. That's the speed at which air resistance balances out gravity. Alan is essentially a human meteorite at this point, and the ground is rushing up to meet him at a speed that will turn him into paste on impact. There's no scenario where this ends with him alive. It's physically impossible. People don't survive falls from this height. The human body just can't withstand the forces involved when you decelerate from 120 miles per hour to 0 in an instant. At some point during during the fall, and we don't know exactly when or how Alan gets separated from the ball turret. Maybe the aerodynamic forces tear it apart. Maybe it hits debris from the bomber. Maybe the impact of the gun's firing creates enough vibration to shake the damaged structure apart. But somehow, he gets thrown clear of the metal sphere. Now he's just a human body in free fall, with no parachute, no protection, nothing. Just falling through the freezing air, probably barely conscious from the lack of oxygen and the G-forces and the sheer trauma of everything that's happening. He's falling through clouds. He's falling through clear air. He's watching the ground get closer and closer. If he's conscious at all during parts of this, he's seen the French countryside getting bigger, individual buildings becoming visible, trees and roads and fields rushing up to meet him. At this point, there's no hope. There's no last-minute save. There's just the certainty of impact and death. And then something happens that can only be described as a miracle, except it's not really a miracle, because we can explain the physics of it after the fact. It's just so wildly improbable that it might as well be a miracle. As Alan is falling toward the city of Saint Nazaire, his trajectory takes him directly over the train station. Not the street beside it, not the field beyond it, but right over the train station itself. And this particular train station has a very specific architectural feature. The roof is made of old-style glass panels set in a metal framework, kind of like a Victorian-era greenhouse or conservatory. It's not a solid concrete roof or a modern steel and tar roof. It's glass. Alan's body hits this glass roof at terminal velocity. Now you're thinking, okay, glass or concrete, what's the difference? He's still hitting a solid surface at 120 miles per hour. He should still be killed instantly. And you'd be right, except for one crucial detail about how this particular impact plays out. When he hits the glass, it doesn't just shatter all at once like a car windshield. It breaks progressively. The first pane of glass he hits shatters and slows him down just a tiny bit. Then he crashes through the metal framework below it, which bends and absorbs a bit more energy. Then he hits another pane of glass, which shatters and slows him down a little more. Then more framework. Then another pane of glass. He's basically crashing through a series of breakaway barriers, each one absorbing some of his kinetic energy and decelerating him incrementally. It's still an incredibly violent collision. It's still crushing and breaking bones and pulverizing tissue. But instead of going from 120 miles per hour to 0 in a millisecond, which would liquefy his internal organs, he's going from 120 miles per hour to 0 over maybe a second or two as he crashes through multiple layers of glass and metal. That tiny difference in deceleration time is the difference between instant death and horrific injury that's somehow survivable. He punches through the roof, through multiple panes of glass, through the supporting metal structure, and finally crashes onto the floor of the train station in a shower of broken glass and twisted metal. The impact is devastating. Every bone in his body should be powder. His organs should be ruptured beyond any hope of survival. By every law of physics and medicine, he should be dead before he even finishes bouncing off the floor. But somehow, impossibly, his heart is still beating. He's unconscious. He's broken in ways that are almost unimaginable, but he's alive. His body is still functioning on some basic level that defies everything we understand about human tolerance for trauma. The German soldiers who are stationed at the train station hear this enormous crash. They come running, probably expecting to find wreckage from the bomber they just shot down, maybe parts of the aircraft or unexploded ordnance. Instead, they find an American airman lying in a spreading pool of blood in the middle of a pile of shattered glass. They're absolutely stunned. Some of them probably think he's already dead because nobody could survive what just happened. But one of them checks for a pulse, and incredibly, he finds one. This guy is alive. Now here's something that says a lot about these particular German soldiers. They could have just left him there to die. They could have finished him off. He's an enemy combatant who was literally just trying to drop bombs on German targets a few minutes ago. In the brutal calculus of war, nobody would have blamed them for just walking away. But they don't. They immediately call for medical help. They treat him as a wounded prisoner of war, which under the Geneva Conventions he technically is, and they get him to a German military hospital as fast as they can. The German doctors who receive him are absolutely baffled. When they start assessing his injuries, they keep finding more and more damage, and they cannot understand how he's still alive. He's got 28 broken bones. His right arm is shattered in multiple places. His pelvis is broken. His back is fractured. His right leg is broken in several spots. Several ribs are broken. His right lung is severely damaged and partially collapsed. collapsed. He's got massive internal bleeding. His right knee is basically destroyed. He's got deep lacerations all over his body from the glass. He's got severe frostbite on his face and hands from the exposure at altitude. Any one of these injuries could potentially be fatal. All of them together should absolutely be fatal. The German medical staff operates on him multiple times. They're actually quite skilled, and they do everything they can to save his life even though he's an enemy soldier. They set the broken bones. They repair internal damage where they can. They stop the bleeding. They treat the frostbite. And somehow, against every odd imaginable, he stabilizes. He doesn't die. He actually starts, very slowly, to recover. When Alan finally regains consciousness and realizes where he is and what happened, he can't believe he's alive. The German doctors and nurses can't believe it either. Word starts spreading through the German military medical community about this American who fell 24,000 feet and lived. It becomes this legendary story even among the Germans. Some of them come to see him just because they want to witness the impossible with their own eyes. Alan spends the rest of the war, more than 2 years, as a prisoner of war in German POW camps. Because of the severity of his injuries, he's not really a threat to escape or cause trouble, but he's still a prisoner. He gets transferred to Stalag Luft III, which history buffs will recognize as the camp where the Great Escape took place. He's there with other captured Allied airmen, and his story becomes famous among them too. The American guy who fell out of the sky and lived. His injuries are so severe that he's never going to fly combat missions again. He walks with a permanent limp. His right arm never fully recovers. He's got chronic pain that's going to plague him for the rest of his life, but he's alive. And in the context of what he went through, that alone is extraordinary. The war drags on. Alan sits in the POW camp watching the seasons change, doing his best to heal, living with the survivor's guilt of being the only one from his crew who made it. The pilot, the co-pilot, the navigator, the bombardier, the other gunners, they all died in that explosion. He survived. There's no logic to it. There's no fairness. That's just how war is. Random and brutal and senseless. Finally, in 1945, the war ends. Germany surrenders. Allied forces liberate the POW camps, and Alan gets to go home. He gets sent back to the United States, back to New Jersey, back to his family, who probably thought he was dead for a good portion of the war. He's got medals and decorations. He's got a story that seems too impossible to be true, and he's got a long road of recovery ahead of him because the physical and psychological scars of what he went through don't just go away. The press gets wind of his story, and it becomes this amazing tale of survival that gets written up in newspapers and magazines. People want to know how it's possible. Scientists and military researchers study his case because they want to understand the mechanics of extreme falls and survival. They look at the trajectory, the angle of his body when he hit the roof, the structure of the glass panels, the deceleration time, everything. The conclusion they reach is that it was basically a perfect storm of factors that all had to align exactly right, or he would have died. Think about all the things that had to happen in exactly the right way. He had to get thrown out of the ball turret instead of staying trapped inside it and hitting the ground encased in metal. He had to fall at a trajectory that brought him over the city instead of the countryside or the ocean. He had to hit that specific train station with that specific type of roof instead of any other building or the street. The glass had to break in a progressive way instead of all at once. He had to land at an angle that distributed the impact forces in a way that didn't instantly kill him. German soldiers had to be nearby and willing to help. German doctors had to be skilled enough to save someone with those catastrophic injuries. Every single one of those factors had to line up perfectly, and they did. There are other cases of people surviving extreme falls, but Alan's case remains one of the most remarkable. There's Vesna Volovi, a Yugoslav flight attendant who survived a fall from 33,000 feet when her plane exploded in 1972, but she had wreckage around her that may have helped. There's Nicholas Alcamad, a British tail gunner who survived an 18,000-foot fall by landing in snow-covered pine trees. But Alan's fall is unique because of the specific mechanism of the glass roof and the height and the severity of the injuries he survived. Over the years, Alan became somewhat reluctant to talk about his experience. He didn't want to be defined by this one event for his entire life, even though it was extraordinary. He just wanted to live normally. He got a job, had a family, tried to put the war behind him like millions of other veterans. But historians and researchers kept coming back to his story because it represented something important about the limits of human endurance and the randomness of survival. The thing is, for every Alan McGee who survives against impossible odds, there are thousands of others who don't. The guys from his crew who were vaporized in the explosion. All the other ball turret gunners who got trapped in their turrets when their planes went down. The guys who successfully bailed out with parachutes but got shot while hanging defenseless in the air. The guys who landed safely but broke their legs and froze to death before anyone found them. The guys who survived being shot down but were executed by angry civilians or brutal guards. For every miracle survival, there are countless deaths that were just as random and just as senseless. What Alan's story really highlights is how young these guys were. He was 21 years old when this happened. 21. Think about the 21-year-olds you know today. Think about yourself at that age if you're old enough to remember. These were kids who went from high school or their first jobs straight into the most violent conflict in human history. Flying missions where they had a very real chance of dying every single time they went up. And they did it anyway, because they believed in the cause, because their country asked them to, because their friends were doing it, because that's what young men did in 1943. The B-17 crews were some of the bravest people in the entire war. They knew the statistics. They knew most of them wouldn't survive their 25 required missions. They watched their friends' planes get shot down in flames. They watched bombers explode in mid-air. They watched aircraft spin into the ground with no parachutes deploying. And then they got up the next morning, climbed into their planes, and did it all over again. The mental strength that requires is almost impossible for us to comprehend from our comfortable perspective 80 years later. After the war, there were efforts to recognize Alan's service and his incredible survival. He received various military honors, though he was always humble about them. He didn't think of himself as a hero. He thought of himself as someone who got incredibly lucky and happened to live through something that should have killed him. But luck was only part of it. Keeping your head enough to continue fighting as your plane is being destroyed, having the physical toughness to survive the impact and the surgeries and the POW camp, all of that took more than luck. Alan McGee lived until 2003. He died at the age of 82, which means he got 60 extra years of life that he shouldn't have had. 60 years to be with his family, to see the world change, to experience peace after the nightmare of war. In his later years, he did give some interviews about what happened to him, and what comes through in those interviews is gratitude and perspective. He knew how close he came to dying. He knew his survival was miraculous, and he never took a single day for granted. His story has been documented in military history books, in academic papers, in documentaries. It's been studied by the Air Force and by researchers interested in survival science. The Smithsonian has materials related to his case. The train station in St. Nazaire where he landed, the building still exists, though the original glass roof was destroyed and rebuilt after the war. Some people make pilgrimages there to see where it happened, to try to imagine the impossibility of it. What's interesting is how the story has evolved over the decades. In the immediate aftermath, it was told as this amazing tale of American resilience and incredible luck. As more research was done, it became a case study in survival mechanics and human durability. In recent years, it's been examined through the lens of trauma and recovery, looking not just at the physical survival, but at the psychological impact of experiencing something so extreme and then having to live with it. There's also the complicated question of what it means to be a survivor. Alan survived the fall, but what did he survive into? He had chronic pain for the rest of his life. He had what we now call PTSD, though back then they didn't have effective treatments for it. He had to live with the knowledge that he made it and his entire crew didn't. Survival isn't always this clean, happy ending. Sometimes it's messy and painful and carries burdens of its own. But at the same time, he got to live. He got to have a life that would have been impossible if things had gone even slightly differently. He got to fall in love, to have children, to see his grandchildren, to experience joy and connection and meaning. He got to tell his story and inspire people. He became a testament to the incredible resilience of the human body and spirit when pushed to the absolute breaking point. When you really sit with this story and think about all the elements of it, it's hard not to be amazed. The violence of a bomber being cut in half in midair, the insanity of a 21-year-old continuing to fire at enemy planes while falling to his death, the mathematical impossibility of surviving a 4.5-mile fall without a parachute, the precision required to hit that specific building at that specific angle, the skill of the German doctors who saved him against all odds, the strength required to recover from those injuries and endure years in a POW camp. Every piece of it is extraordinary, and yet it's all documented. It all really happened. There are military records, medical records, eyewitness accounts from both American and German sources. The physical evidence existed. This isn't a myth or a legend or an exaggerated war story. This is a true account of something that defies belief, but happened anyway. There's something about World War II stories that continues to captivate us all these decades later. Maybe it's because the stakes were so existentially high. Maybe it's because the conflict involved so many people from so many countries that almost everyone has some connection to it. Maybe it's because we're now far enough removed from it that it's firmly in the realm of history, but recent enough that we can still talk to some of the last survivors and hear their first-hand accounts. Stories like Alan's remind us that history isn't just dates and battles and statistics. It's individual human experiences, each one unique and valuable and worth preserving. Think about the German soldiers who found him in that train station. They had their own story happening in parallel. They were stationed in occupied France, far from their homes, doing their duty as they understood it in a war they probably didn't fully agree with. When they found this broken American airman, they could have walked away or finished the job. Instead, they chose compassion. They chose to see him as a fellow human being who needed help. In the middle of total war, in a moment when hate would have been easy and justified, they chose mercy. That's worth remembering. The crew members who died when the bomber exploded, they all had their own stories that ended that day. The pilot who was trying to keep the formation tight and get everyone home, the navigator plotting their course, the bombardier preparing the bomb run, all of them gone in an instant. Alan carried their memory with him for 60 years after that. In a way, his survival meant their sacrifice wasn't forgotten. The technology of the era is worth considering too. The B-17 was an amazing feat of engineering for its time. It could take tremendous damage and keep flying, which is how it earned the nickname Flying Fortress. But it was also vulnerable in specific ways, and the Germans learned exactly how to exploit those vulnerabilities. The ball turret was a brilliant solution to the problem of defending the underside of the bomber, but it was also a death trap. The whole air war over Europe was this deadly chess match between American ingenuity and German tactical skill, with thousands of lives as the stakes. Looking back on these events with historical distance doesn't diminish the terror and chaos the people involved experienced. For Alan, those seconds of falling through the sky must have felt like an eternity. The roar of the wind, the spinning, the cold, the absolute certainty of death. We can study it and analyze it and marvel at it, but we can't really know what that felt like. We can only try to imagine. What's remarkable is that after surviving something so traumatic, Alan was able to rebuild his life at all. A lot of veterans struggled terribly with reintegration after the war. Some never made it back to normal life, but Alan found a way to carry what happened to him without letting it completely destroy him. That takes a different kind of courage than the kind needed to keep firing at enemy planes while falling from the sky. It's the quiet, daily courage of choosing to keep going, even when you're in pain, even when you're haunted, even when it would be easier to give up. His story raises interesting questions about fate and randomness. Was there some meaning to his survival? Was there a reason he lived when so many others died? Or was it just pure cosmic chance, a dice roll that happened to come up in his favor? People answer those questions differently depending on their beliefs, but the questions themselves are worth thinking about. There's no easy answer, and maybe that's fine. Maybe the story is powerful precisely because it doesn't fit into neat explanations. It's messy and complicated and miraculous and tragic all at once, just like life itself. Alan's survival doesn't diminish the deaths of his crew or the thousands of other airmen who didn't make it. It doesn't make the war less horrible, but it does give us this one incredible moment of human resilience to hold on to. In the decades since, there have been numerous scientific studies on high-altitude falls and survival rates. Researchers have tried to identify what factors increase someone's chances. The data shows it's almost always fatal, but that almost matters. There are enough rare cases of survival to suggest that under very specific specific circumstances, the human body can withstand forces that should destroy it. Alan's case remains one of the most studied because it's one of the most extreme. The physics of his survival are fascinating. When he hit that glass roof, his body experienced massive deceleration forces, but those forces were spread out over the time it took to crash through multiple barriers. Instead of going from 120 miles per hour to zero instantly, which would have turned his organs to liquid, he decelerated over maybe a second or two. That tiny difference kept him alive. His injuries tell the story of the impact. Every broken bone, every ruptured organ, every laceration is a clue to understanding exactly what happened in those seconds. Medical professionals who review his case are consistently amazed he survived any of it, let alone all of it. But here's what I keep coming back to. Beyond all the science and the odds and the analysis, there's just this image of a kid falling through the sky and refusing to stop fighting. That's the heart of the story. That's what makes it more than just a statistical anomaly. It's about the human spirit and the will to survive and the courage to keep going, even when everything is literally falling apart around you. We share these stories because they matter. They remind us what people are capable of, both the horror they can inflict and the resilience they can show. They connect us to a past that's slipping further away as the last World War II veterans pass on. Soon there will be no one left who remembers firsthand, and all we'll have are the stories. That makes preserving them even more important. Alan McGee's story deserves to be remembered not as some feel-good tale of triumph, but as an honest account of what one person endured and somehow survived. It's a reminder of the costs of war, the randomness of fate, the value of compassion toward enemies, and the toughness of the human body and spirit. It's a story that shouldn't be possible, but is, and that makes it worth telling and retelling. So here's what I want you to do. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think. Does this story change how you think about World War II? Does it make you wonder about the other stories we haven't heard? What would you have done in Alan's position? I want to hear your thoughts. Second, share this video with someone who loves history or incredible survival stories, or just tales that seem too crazy to be true. This is the kind of story that deserves a wider audience, and sharing helps make that happen. And if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to Wasim Rind, because we're going to keep bringing you these unbelievable true stories that you won't find anywhere else. Hit that bell icon so you don't miss the next one. Alan McGee fell 24,000 feet without a parachute, crashed through a glass roof, survived injuries that should have killed him multiple times over, spent 2 years as a prisoner of war, and lived another 60 years after that. His story proves that sometimes, just sometimes, the impossible becomes possible. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.